Would you believe that people once lifted stones incredibly heavier than a fully loaded jumbo jet with no engine, no crane, nothing but rope, wood, and their own two hands? Some of them are so heavy that honestly, we're not sure we could move them cleanly even today. And here's the strange part. Nobody left us the instructions. Apparently, they just knew how. So I already did the digging, and let me tell you the story. Today, a crane hums over a city skyline. Somebody pushes a lever, and a steel beam floats 100 meters into the air while we barely look up. We just assume that's how heavy things have always moved, that somewhere there's an engine doing the lifting for us. But go back far enough, and you land in a completely different world. Pneumotor. No hydraulics. No steel cable. No button to press. And yet, in that world, ordinary people raised the Great Pyramid out of more than 2 million blocks of stone. They stood incredibly tall granite columns, taller than a 5-story building. They lifted single blocks as heavy as a jumbo jet and set them into walls, meters up in the air. And thousands of years later, incredibly, most of it is still standing. So how did they actually pull it off? How did ordinary people move and lift stones weighing hundreds of tons with nothing but muscle, rope, wood, and water? It isn't a lost secret, and it isn't magic. It comes down to 4 simple ideas, and the first one is hiding inside a word you've known since you were a kid. Here's the one idea to hold on to, because everything else grows out of it. Originally, ancient people had no way to add power they didn't have. There was no engine to conjure more force out of thin air. So instead of adding power, they learned to stretch the little they had. And every clever machine they built, from a plank of wood to an entire quarry, ran on one incredibly simple bargain. You move a small force a long way, to move a huge weight a short way. That's it. Push gently, for a long time, across a long distance, and in return, a mountain shifts an inch. A ramp does it. A lever does it. They gave up distance, they gave up time, and what they bought with it was force. Everything you're about to see is that same trick, wearing 4 completely different disguises. The ramp, the lever, the war on friction, and the crowd. And it starts with the humblest one of all, a gentle slope. The first idea was to never really lift at all, because hauling a 2-ton block straight up is brutal. But sliding it up a long, gentle ramp? That's a different problem entirely. Make the slope shallow enough around 5 or 6 degrees, and the force you need drops to roughly 1/10 of the stone's weight. You trade a short climb for a long walk, and suddenly a handful of people can do the work of 100. Exactly how the Egyptians originally got their blocks up the pyramids is still argued about today, whether the ramp ran straight out from one side, wrapped around the whole thing, or, in one leading idea, even spiraled up inside the pyramid itself. But in 2018, in an ancient quarry called Hatnub, archaeologists found a real one, an incredibly steep ramp cut into the rock, with staircases up both sides and rows of holes for wooden posts. And those posts might be the clever part. Loop a rope around a post, and a team up top can haul upward while a second team below pulls down, the post bending their effort like a simple pulley. Muscle, redirected. Not multiplied, redirected. But a ramp only ever slides a stone along the ground. To stand one upright, they reached for the oldest tool we've got. Give someone a long enough lever, and they can move almost anything, and the ancients knew it in their bones. The real trick was patience. You lever one corner of a giant block up by a few centimeters, slide a wedge of wood underneath, then do the same on the other side. Rock, pack, rock, pack. Little by little, a small crew walks a 100-ton block up into the air, without ever once lifting its full weight. This is how they raised the obelisks, those single, needle-thin spikes of granite. The one still standing at Karnak is nearly 30 meters tall and weighs around 340 tons, carved from one unbroken piece of stone. Incredibly, the largest of all, now in Rome, comes in at about 450. Each one was tipped upright over a pit of sand on the end of an incredibly long lever the size of a tree. And on a tiny island out in the Pacific, this same idea hid a secret that sounded, for centuries, like a fairy tale. The people of Easter Island always said their giant stone heads the Moai had walked to their places. Not been dragged, walked. For years, everybody assumed that was just a legend. Apparently not. In 2012, a team put it to the test. 18 people, 3 ropes tied to a standing statue, rocking it side to side, and the moai stepped forward, swaying across the ground on its own base, exactly as the islanders had always said. Levers and ramps could move the stone, but the ground itself was still fighting back, so they found a way to switch the ground off. There's a painting on the wall of an Egyptian tomb almost 4,000 years old. It shows a colossal statue on a wooden sledge and 172 men straining at the ropes to drag it. But the detail that matters is small and easy to miss. Right at the front of the sledge, one guy is bent over, pouring water onto the sand. Originally, everyone figured he was doing something religious, an offering, a blessing for the road. He wasn't. In 2014, physicists at the University of Amsterdam worked out what he was really up to, and it turned out to be one incredibly smart trick. Drag a sledge over dry sand, and the sand piles up in front of it, building a little hill that fights you the whole way. But wet that sand with just the right amount of water, somewhere between 2 and 5%, and the grains lock into a firm, flat surface, almost like the packed sand at the edge of the sea. That one change cuts the friction roughly in half the drag, which means half the people. One man with a jug of water was quietly doing the work of dozens. Pour too much, though, and it all turns to soup, and everything completely grinds to a halt. So they'd found the exact line, and walked right up to it. Apparently, 4,000 years ago, somebody already understood wet sand better than most of us do today. Ramp, lever, water, each one shaved the load down. But the real engine under all of it was never the wood or the rope. It was the people. A single rope, braided thick from papyrus and flax, could turn hundreds of separate arms into one incredibly steady pull. And for a long time, we pictured the hands on that rope as slaves whipped forward under a blazing sun. But the ground tells a completely different story. At the workers' village beside the Giza pyramids, archaeologists dug up the bones and the leftovers of the people who actually built the things. And they'd been fed well bread, beef, and beer, patched up when they got hurt, some even surviving major surgery that healed clean in the bone. These were paid, respected workers. So the machine that raised the pyramids wasn't an engine, and it wasn't cruelty. It was a crowd, organized and moving as one. And over the centuries, that idea kept getting sharper. By the Middle Ages, builders had folded the crowd into a wheel, the treadwheel crane, a giant wooden ring with people walking inside it, like a hamster wheel the size of a room. 2 or 3 people, strolling inside that wheel, could hoist incredibly heavy blocks, several tons each, dozens of meters up the side of a rising cathedral. Human muscle geared up and aimed at the sky. 4 forces then. But raw force can only move a stone. It can't make it fit. And fit is where these builders stopped being laborers and turned into something closer to artists. High in the Andes, in the old Inca walls of Cusco and the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, there are stones the size of small trucks, some well over 100 tons, cut into strange, lumpy, many-sided shapes. And yet they fit against their neighbors so incredibly tightly that, even now, you can't slide a knife blade or a sheet of paper into the seam between them. No mortar, no gap, just stone kissing stone so snug that when the earthquakes come and the newer buildings crack and fall, these ancient walls just hold. Back in Egypt, the Great Pyramid was originally wrapped in a smooth white skin of polished limestone. Its blocks fitted with joints averaging 0.5 millimeter, thinner than a fingernail. And incredibly, the whole enormous base was laid down aligned to true north, to within about 1/15 of a single degree, squared off at the corners to an error you'd need instruments to even see. This was never luck. It was mastery, at a scale that's almost impossible to really picture. And once you can move a stone that well, and set it that perfectly, a question starts to itch. How far did they push it? The answer is a place that still stops modern engineers dead in their tracks. In a valley in Lebanon, there's a ruin called Baalbek, and built into the base of its great temple sit 3 blocks of stone so incredibly large they barely feel real. They're called the Trilithon, and each one weighs somewhere around 800 tons. Not 800 tons spread across a wall, 800 tons each, as a single piece of stone lifted several meters up off the ground and slotted into place, side by side, so neatly you'd struggle to fit a knife between them. And incredibly, those weren't even the biggest. 900 meters away, still lying in the quarry where it was cut, is a block they call the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, around 1,000 tons. Next to it, another at over 1,200. And in 2014, half buried underneath them, archaeologists uncovered the largest worked stone ever found from the ancient world, roughly 1,650 tons. Let me put that in something you can actually picture. A fully loaded jumbo jet weighs about 400 tons. That single stone weighs as much as 4 of them, stacked on top of each other. And here's the part I love the most, the honest part. We still argue about exactly how the 800-ton wall stones were moved and lifted into place. Apparently nobody thought to write it down. Our best answer is rope and rollers, and hundreds of turning capstans worked by hundreds of hands. And yeah, this is the point in the story where the internet leans in and whispers aliens. But you really don't need them. What you need is 1,000 people, a river of rope, and a kind of patience we can barely imagine anymore. No engine did this, just hands, and time, and silence. And then, almost overnight, all of it was completely forgotten. The turning point came fast, and it came with steam. In 1846, an English inventor named William Armstrong built a crane driven not by muscle, but by water pressure and machine power. And for the first time in history, the lifting happened on its own. Then, in 1867, a French gardener named Joseph Monnier patented something that would quietly rewrite the whole art of building: reinforced concrete. And here's the funny bit, he originally invented it to make sturdier plant pots. Iron mesh, sunk into cement, so his flower pots would stop cracking. Ironically, the entire modern skyline kind of started with a better flower pot, because that incredibly small idea exploded outward into beams and bridges and towers. And it completely changed the deal. You didn't have to find a mountain, carve it, and drag it across a desert anymore. Now, you could pour liquid stone into a mold, wait, and let an engine do the lifting. Within a single century, the machines and the concrete swept away the ramps, the rope teams, the wet sand, the patient crowds. The lever had lost to the piston. We'd won. Except every trade comes with a bill, and ours is only just coming due. Look, for a second, at everything we gained. We can throw up a skyscraper in a matter of months, a tower taller than any pyramid with a tiny crew and a few machines. That's incredibly impressive, no question. But then look at what slipped away. We lost the deep, patient knowledge of stone. We lost the builders who worked on cathedrals they knew they'd never live to see finished laying stones for their great-grandchildren. And strangest of all, we lost permanence. Ancient stone stands for 2, 3, 4,000 years and counting. Modern reinforced concrete is often built to last 50 to 100 because the steel hidden inside it slowly rusts and swells and cracks the whole thing completely apart from the inside out. So we build faster than anyone in history, and ironically, we build things that fall apart sooner. And there's a hidden cost underneath even that. Making the cement for all that concrete now pumps out around 8% of the world's carbon dioxide. If the cement industry were a country, it'd be one of the biggest polluters on the entire planet, 3rd or 4th in the world. Think about that. The ancients built slowly, out of mud and stone and sunlight, and their work outlived their empires. We build in a flash, out of concrete and steel, and a lot of it won't outlive us. Which brings us right back to that crane and that beam floating up against the sky. Somebody pushes a lever, an engine hums, and a steel beam rises 100 meters into the air while we barely look up. For a moment, it feels like we finally beat the problem, like we mastered the impossible weight that once took 1,000 human hands. But we didn't master it. We bought it. And somewhere along the way, we completely forgot it was ever done for free. The people who came before us couldn't press a button. So instead, they read the slope of a hill, they wetted the sand, they walked their statues, and they turned rope and patience into incredibly durable pyramids and temples that are still standing today. And now, just as we start to feel the weight of what we traded away, engineers are quietly going back, studying dry stone walls, low-carbon building, even Roman concrete that heals its own cracks, trying to relearn how to build things that last. So, honestly, maybe the future of building isn't a bigger engine at all. Maybe, ironically, it's been standing out in the desert and up in the mountains this whole time. If you want to see more forgotten engineering like the stones of Baalbek, stick around and we'll keep digging it back up.